Welcome to the Golden Age of Cardboard podcast, where we remember a time when stacks of cards were held together with rubber bands and Mickey Mantles were put in bike spokes. We hope you will enjoy and reminisce as you come along with us as we tell stories about the baseball cards from the Golden Age of Baseball. We will examine the state of the vintage baseball card market and talk to some of the greatest collectors in the hobby. You won't be hearing us talk about any chrome or shiny cards here. Now, to take you on this retrospective journey, here's your host, direct from the shallow end of the gene pool, my son, Mike Moynihan.
Yo, and hello, everybody. Mike here, Golden Age of Cardboard podcast. Welcome to another episode. And, as I record this, getting ready for this episode that's going to be this week, it's 3 weeks from when the National is going to be. Like 3 weeks from today, the show will be starting. And I'm super excited and can't wait for that. It's always it's almost like the anticipation and the lead up is almost greater than the event itself. That's not really true, but it's like, you get so amped up and then the show happens and it's over and you're like, I got to wait 12 more months. But time goes fast, especially the older I get. I find that Father Time is catching me faster and faster every day. Today, I'm going to talk to a guy that's been in the hobby a really long time, Mike Sommer from Wax Pack Hero. You always want to do Wax Packs, but it's Wax Pack Hero podcast. I've listened to Mike for a long, long time. We'll tell you a little story here in a minute, but we're going to talk about the different ways to hobby and how to enjoy this hobby. And it's beyond vintage. It's kind of beyond everything. But I think if you're a vintage collector, this will matter to you as much as if you're a modern collector, because it's just how you to approach the hobby. And Mike and I have different ways that we approach the hobby. And so I'm excited to talk to him about it. I'm going to bring him on right now and we will get going. Mike Sommer, welcome to the show. How are you?
Good. How are you? I am excited to be here on the inaugural edition of On the Fly with Mike and Mike. Forget Ty. We have Mike and Mike tonight.
That's right. And that may sell, that Mike and Mike thing. Maybe somebody's done that before. I don't know. On radio.
Mike and Mike in the evening. I don't think that one's been done.
That's true. Mike in the Morning certainly was one of my favorite shows I listened to forever. And then Greeny got all ego and left Golick all hanging in the balance. But anyway, welcome to the show. I'm so glad you're here because we do things different. But before we get into that topic, I think it's funny. Yeah, I have you to thank for having Golden Age of Cardboard, in large part because 2 years ago, about this time of year, I interviewed you and John Newman from Sports Card Nation about content creation and making podcasts. Do you remember that?
Yeah. I was honored to be a part of the first Hobby Palooza that we did. And it was the first time you and I had actually had a chance to chat. And so, it was a good time. I learned so much from John when I first got started. He'd been around, several months longer than me. And I picked his brain a lot as I was getting started podcasting. And then, it's one of the things I just love to do is talk about content creation as well, and why I do what I do, and how there's room for all of us to do it. And so, it was cool to be a part of that show. And I'm glad that it somewhat inspired you or whatever to move beyond just the video content into the podcasting content as well.
Well, it's funny because Ty was supposed to do that interview and he had something else going on. So I had to kind of fill in the moment. And I'm like, I don't do podcasts. I hadn't even really listened a ton to podcasts, honestly, before that. I was a YouTube consumer. And then I started listening. Before that, knowing I was going to do that, I went, frantically, like, let me look these guys up. Like, I don't even know who these guys are. And started listening to a few things and then started listening in my car. And now it's pretty much all I listen to in my car there's 3 or 4 podcasts, 5 podcasts, maybe. Dr. Beckett's, yours, John's, flagship podcast. I found that there's not a ton of hobby podcasts out there, even still. I mean, there's a few, and I said, I want to do one on vintage. I'm like, I would love to do that, but I had no idea how. Like everybody kept telling me, oh, you should do a podcast. I'm like, that's great, but I wouldn't even know where to start. Well, then the Bench Clear thing happened. Ty has a long history of doing podcasts for Breaker Culture and for his channel Breaker Culture. And I was like, okay. And then I picked y'all's brain. So if you don't like Golden Age of Cardboard, it's his fault. You can blame Mike. No, y'all were a great inspiration to me for sure. And just, it really made me go, okay. I was really like, if these dorks can do this, then I can certainly do this. That's kind of really, no.
That's how it is with all of us in the hobby, right? It's if those us cardboard nerds can do something that some people find enjoyable, then pretty much anybody can do it if you're passionate about what you're talking about.
Well, in those 2 years, I've consumed just about every podcast that you've put out there. And one resonating theme that you tend to talk about often is building a sustainable hobby. What I'd like you to do first is maybe define what that is in your mind. And then we'll talk a little bit later about how that's different from the way I hobby, always from the standpoint of there's no wrong way to hobby, right? It's you do you, but at the same time, there might be some nuggets of wisdom that you can, impart on some people on how to make their hobby experience maybe a little bit better.
Yeah, and the only caveat I'd say the only wrong way to hobby is if you're using money that needs to be going towards family commitments, your house, going into debt to buy cards and those types of things. I would categorize that as the wrong way to hobby. But that all kind of also rolls into why I do things the way that I do them, why I like to try to say that I have a self-sustaining hobby. And it kind of goes back to when I got back into the hobby in 2016 and I started to get a feel for the lay of the land. So much had changed from when I was a kid, right? You weren't able to go to Sam's Club and buy a wax box for $16 or whatever, right?
Oh, I remember those days.
It was $50 or $100 or $150 for even the flagship type products, and even more than that for high-end products. And it didn't take me too long to realize that if I wanted to collect the way that I wanted to collect, I was going to need to do something to offset some of that cost. And I'd always had somewhat of an entrepreneurial streak. And so it wasn't too long before I started digging through the dime boxes, quarter boxes, dollar boxes at our LCS. And I was finding some nuggets that I knew could sell for $1 or $2 or $5 or $10 on eBay. And so I started to dabble in some of that, and I started to find some success generating some extra profits. It started out as $20, $40, $50, $100 a month that I was able to generate selling some of these cards. And then I was able to use that to cover the cost of the top Series 1 box that was coming out, or the Series 2 box that was coming out, or a Stadium Club box that was coming out, or whatever it was that I wanted to open and have some fun with. And as I started to do that, I was like, hey, I'm able to buy and sell some things, and then I'm able to use those profits to totally cover the cost of the things that I want to buy for fun and things that I want to buy to add to my collection. And I don't have to use any of my paycheck money or any of the normal quote unquote budget from my day-to-day job or family budget or whatever you want to call it to do that. And that both allowed me to scratch that entrepreneurial itch, add cards to my collection essentially for free. And I could totally avoid that conversation that maybe we joke about from time to time about how much are you spending when you have that conversation with your spouse, right? And I found that I was having so much fun buying and selling so that I could make some profits to use towards cards that I wanted to add to my own collection, that just enhanced the enjoyment that I was having, knowing that I was building this collection essentially for free. And at the end of the day, I still had this great collection of cards and sets and everything that I was building that essentially cost me nothing other than my time and effort, which I was enjoying along the way.
Yeah, I know we got straight into the topic because I just find it fascinating, this whole self-sustaining hobby idea. But you've been, like you mentioned, you collected as a kid, took a break, right, as an adult, and started collecting again 6 or 7 years ago, right?
Yep.
Okay. I want that to be the backdrop that, it doesn't matter when you come into the hobby, you'll probably have some sticker shock if you've been out for a while, right? And you're like, whoa, this is not my hobby when I was a kid. And again, my experience was different because I've been in the hobby the whole time for 40 years straight. And so I saw it, but it's like if you have your niece or something or nephew, and you see them when they're kids, and it's like 5 years till you see them again, you go back, oh my gosh, you've changed a lot. They've grown up or whatever. And that's how the hobby can pass you by. If you're living with your kids, you don't notice the incremental change in your kids, but if your kids aren't seen by someone for years, they go, wow, he's changed a lot. And I think that's what our different experiences created was was part of it for me. But you said something that you enjoy it. And I find that interesting. Did you enjoy the hunt for like, oh, I'm gonna try to find some gems today? Was it only at LCSs? Were you doing it on eBay? Were you doing it on other platforms? I'm asking a lot of questions at once, but it all ties into, the enjoyment was the hunt and going, man, I know what this can go for.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think that hits on a couple things. And one, to do what I do, you have to enjoy putting in the work to buy, organize, sort, list, and pack and ship, right? Like you have to enjoy that. And some people just hate it. Some people want no part of that, right? And that's totally cool. And I get to that part of why there's different approaches. I don't mind it because I enjoy so much that idea of discovering something that somebody felt was not worth anything and turning that into like finding a market for that, finding a collector who wants to add that to their PC and turning it into something of value. And that gets to my second point of part of what I enjoyed is when I got back into it, I was all about building sets because that's what I did when I was a kid, right? And one of the first things I learned is that the general consensus within the hobby is that base and insert cards are trash and are worthless. And set builders are old school. Nobody does that anymore. And so I was able to start building these sets that I wanted to build it as I was getting back into it so cheap because I was buying these bulk lots of base and insert cards for almost next to nothing, right? Like pennies or half pennies a piece. And so as I was doing that, I ended up with a whole bunch of doubles as I was buying these big lots of base and insert cards. And so that's kind of how I got started in the reselling is because I put together my set. I'd have a few hundred extra cards from that set and I found sport lots and started to list them on sport lots. And, I was turning these cards I was paying a half a cent a piece for or whatever because they were worthless and turning them into 18 cents to $1 a piece. And again, that started with making an extra $50 or $100 a month that I was able to then use to cover the cost of either these bulk lots or new sealed wax. And so it stemmed from my enjoyment of putting together all of these sets. And then that enjoyment of me feeling like, hey, somebody thought this was worthless stuff that I was able to buy thousands of cards for $30 or whatever it was, and then turn that into hundreds of dollars later on. I just enjoyed that so much that it just added to the excitement that I got when I was building these sets, knowing that I was doing it from what somebody thought was just junk.
Yeah. It ties in a little bit to a concept that I call found money, right?
Yep.
And you're not really finding the money. I mean, you're working hard to generate this profit. So I'm not trying to belittle the effort that it takes to make this work and be sustainable. I think enjoying all of those aspects that you mentioned, the pieces of the pie to make this work is important. You're not going to love every bit of anything you do, right? But the reality is you need to at least tolerate it to know what's on the other end of that is a really cool card that I can add to my PC or a set that I can add or different things that you might want to do. And so you're right about the 2010s, especially. I remember being very hit centric. I'd see guys come into the LCS, they'd buy a box of cards, they would pull out the hits and literally give all the rest of the cards back to the shop. Here, just take all I don't even want them at my house, base cards, even color, back then, parallels and stuff, inserts and everything. And they, just take them. I just want the 1 or 2 jersey cards or 1 autograph or whatever I pulled from this box, which to me was very short-sighted because now kind of came full circle, and base and inserts became popular. It became cool again to own base cards of rookies. And, that all started basically with the Aaron Judge. I think 2017 was kind of when was that his year? 2016, maybe
2017. Yeah.
27. I was right the first time. That's a miracle. So that ushered in a different era, right? That we're still seeing today, although I think it's waning. Honestly, I think the base card, because of the junk slab era that we're in now, I think of everybody grading everything under the sun, it's diminishing the value of the base card, which I think is sad, by the way. I'm not a proponent of that, but I don't control how that happens in the hobby. It just happens whether I care or not. So you mentioned the entrepreneurial itch. That's developed for you, not just, it's beyond sports lots and COMC or wherever you might send cards. I mean, you now have a brick and mortar shop, right?
Yeah. So everything just continued to grow, right? It started from buying those, dollar box, quarter box, dime box type cards. And eventually that continued to grow. The LCS that was in our area, he eventually said, "Hey, you've been buying a lot of these collections from me. You should come to one of the local shows. I've got extra space at the tables that I get. You should set up with me and start to set up at this local show." And so I started doing that. And the first show, I think I took three 3-row boxes or something worth of cards, all low end. And I made like $75 for the day or whatever. And I was thrilled. I just had so much fun. I'd never done anything like that before. And that just continued to set up, and grow from there. So I started to set up on my own and have my own tables. Our LCS had kind of expanded, doubled his space. He does a lot of Magic the Gathering tournaments and things like that. And so there was a kind of a whole section of the shop that was just tables where people came and played Magic and that type of thing. Well, once a month, we started hosting a small local show with, 5-6 dealers and, maybe 12 to 20 tables, something like that. And I started doing that every month and was building relationships and continued to grow my inventory over time. And then in 2020, that same shop, as he took over, there was kind of a dedicated space that was kind of the foyer entryway area of the kind of neighboring storefront. And one of the other local collectors had been kind of renting that space as kind of a shop within a shop setup for a couple of years. And in 2020, when COVID hit, that guy decided that when things were ready to reopen, he was just kind of done. It was kind of a side deal for him as well. And he didn't want to do it anymore. And he approached me and said, "Hey, would you be interested in buying me out and kind of taking over this kind of secondary shop or the shop within a shop setup?" And I said, you talked with my wife, and we kind of discussed it and said, "You know what, let's give it a shot and see what we can do." And so since the summer of 2020, I've been running kind of a part-time LCS as a shop within a shop of kind of the main LCS in our town. And so I'm only open on the weekends, but I've got my own dedicated space there where I kind of operate independently from him. And, we've been doing that for, I guess it's been just about 2 years now.
That's awesome. But
yeah, it works out really well. Just, kind of a unique setup where we kind of have two shops in one on the weekends. And so we kind of complement each other inventory wise. And, it's been a really cool setup that you don't hear a lot of people doing elsewhere across the country.
Yeah. I'm getting some kind of choppy audio on my end, so I'm sure it's me. But I'm just letting you know, anybody out there, if you're listening to this on podcast, I apologize if there's some choppy audio, but it's probably my internet connection recording this. So I totally own that. You mentioned the time that it takes to build up your inventory, sell cards, list them, all of that kind of stuff. Do you set like, okay, I'm going to do this a certain number of hours a week, a day? Do you block off time in your schedule to get everything done that needs to get done?
Yeah. So the shop, I'm only open noon to 4 on Saturday and Sunday afternoons. And so that's kind of it for kind of that brick and mortar presence is it's just that 8 hours a week, 4 hours on Saturday, 4 hours on Sunday. The other stuff, it seems to work out really well for me because I'm an early riser. So a lot of times I'm up at 4:45, 5 o'clock in the morning. And that's just when I wake up. I don't think I've set an alarm for probably 8 years. That's just when I wake up. And so the rest of my family doesn't wake up, at that time. And so I've usually got, 2 to 3 hours before I have to start my day job or go into my day job where I'm able to do a lot of that order filling, content creation, podcast editing, all of that kind of stuff between that kind of 5 and 7-ish window every morning. And so I'm fortunate that I'm an early riser. I'm able to do that and spend, a decent amount of time every day and every week before the rest of the family even wakes up. And so that's when I get a lot of that kind of stuff done. And then there's other times throughout the evening and that type of thing where I'll fill some more orders or I'll do some other stuff and that type of thing. I've got my daughters involved a little bit in helping me sort from time to time and put some things in order for some of the stuff that I'll eventually list on Sport Lots. They'll help me put things in number order and spend a little time, and we'll talk and sort and do some of those types of things. So that helps out a little bit too. But yeah, I try to avoid doing card related stuff during kind of the peak, especially during the school year from, 3 to 7 or so when they're getting home from school and we're doing homework and eating dinner and doing all of that kind of stuff. But a lot of my stuff gets done early morning, kind of, between 5 and 7 a.m.
So I want to bring up something you've talked about before on your show. And by the way, Wax Pack Hero, I keep saying it, Wax Pack Hero on everywhere you can get podcasts. Go listen to Mike. You'll enjoy it for sure. And again, different take on the hobby than me, but we have a lot of similarities. You love vintage, right? Yep. You're a vintage guy, I think, at heart. You've built some vintage sets using this sustaining hobby, method, right?
Oh yeah. Yeah. I've gone all the way back at this point, from the mid 90s when I stopped. I've gone all the way back from getting all of the complete top sets from the mid 90s all the way back through. I just wrapped up a couple months ago, the 67 top set. And so I was just kind of working my way back through the 70s. And, especially once I started to get to those early 70s sets where there was still high numbers from 73 on back. I mean, adding all of those high numbers or being able to fill out all of those high numbers in the early 70s and then even back to 67, the last card I got that I needed was the Seaver rookie in 67, all paid for just with the profits from these things. Like that was just so fun to continue to go back and build out these sets. Just use some sales from May and June to purchase a huge collection of 59 through 62 big lots of those. I think there was maybe 1,400, 1,500 cards or something from 59 to 62 that I was able to get some really nice starter sets, including some high numbers and that type of thing. I think I ended up paying about 75 cents a card, maybe, including the high numbers that were in there on average. But again, that huge lot, some great starter sets for those late, 59 to 62, all paid for with some of my sales and profits from other cards that I've been buying and reselling. So yeah, so adding these vintage and building these vintage sets has been a huge piece of what I've been enjoying through this whole process as well. So yeah, it's not just modern stuff, but it's this vintage stuff too that I've been able to continue to work towards and fill out sets and build sets and that type of thing. I know you're not a set builder, but I still enjoy that piece of history.
I have turned into a set builder a little bit. So a lot of people may or may not know this, but I collect Hall of Famers and all that for sure. But I started, I have all the way back to 73 every year since now to 73. I'm looking forward to, I usually buy my 2022 top set at the National because they usually come out factory set form a week or two before the National. And so I'll be picking one of those up at the show most likely. So I love collecting sets. I love having the entire set. There's just something satisfactory about, man, I've got every card that they made that year for the flagship product, right? And so I love that. And so then I went back and I did 1960, which is my favorite year. I built the 60 top set.
Okay.
And I did that through buying lots, and then the high numbers and all that kind of stuff. And the good thing is I already had all the Hall of Famers. I just needed the commons basically and semi-stars, non-Hall of Famer guys. And so that made it a little more palatable financially to do that. Then I did 65 because I love that set. And then I just recently, I only need like 2 cards to finish the 1970 top set. And so I'm not doing them in any order other than the reason I did 70 was John Newman had bought a collection and he had a whole lot of really nice examples. And I bought them all I said, I'll buy all of them. I need these, and so I did that, and that started me on this. And I'm like, okay, I'm so OCD. I'm like, well, I've got to finish it now. And then, just started adding other stuff. I still need a few cards for that, actually, more than 2. I think I need 2 commons and a few more Hall of Famers, but I'm pretty close on that set.
Cool.
And so I've enjoyed that, honestly. It becomes a little mundane, especially on the high number stuff. And you've probably experienced, you're like, I'm paying how much for who? Who's this guy? Why am I paying $20 for, or whatever it might be for a high number card? You're like, what? That doesn't feel good, but I want the set, that drives more than I'm more excited to get the set complete than I am angry that the card's so expensive, if that makes sense.
That really hit me with the 67 set, because that last series, man, those cards are pricey even for the commons. But again, that goes back to, it bothered me less knowing that I was turning in 2018 cent 2015 to 2022 base and insert cards from Sport Lots into those 60s high numbers, right? And there's something about that made it a little more palatable to be able to spend that $20, $25, $40 for a common 67 high number or whatever it was, knowing that I was turning in and these other base and insert cards into those funds that I was using to buy that. It just makes it a little more palatable, makes it a little more enjoyable for me, knowing I'm essentially consolidating, right, 2,000 to 3,000 of these base and insert cards into 5 or 6 or 10 of these vintage high numbers that I needed for the set. A little bit more than that eventually to get that Seaver that I used to finish off the set.
Yeah. And the difference between us is you have this sustainable hobby model. I just use discretionary funds to fund my hobby. Yep. And, we all have choices in how we do that. And what you said earlier, I could not agree with more, which is make sure all your bills are paid, make sure you're saving for retirement, make sure you're putting money away for your kids to go to college. All of that happens before I get to spend any hobby dollars. Like I make sure all of that's taken care of first and foremost. And that, because that's the way my wife, we always agreed that, okay, as long as everything else is taken care of, you can do your hobby. And the reason she loves the vintage part is she knows that that's a pretty fair, I don't want to use the word investment, a fair allocation of capital. Sure. Meaning if I needed to, I could sell everything I have behind me tomorrow and come out pretty okay. You know what I mean? Meaning not just break even, but I'd be in the green quite a bit on stuff that I've bought over the years, stuff I bought at the right time, stuff I bought long ago. So she knows that that's just the truth of it. And even if we see we are in an economic recession, but I'm just saying, if we see the hobby kind of falter a little bit, vintage just doesn't drop like a rock. It doesn't crater. And so she feels like, okay, we're not just literally throwing the money away, into something that's going to be worthless. So that's a lot more, she's more agreeable to that for that reason. So my hobby budget changes literally month to month because my income is variable. And so I don't have a salary. And so I have an amount of money I typically make in a month, but there can be months I make a lot more, months I make a lot less. And so my hobby budget will vary accordingly. I don't think I've ever really talked about this because so many people are on a fixed budget of I spend $100 a month, $500 a month, whatever that number is.
Yep.
And you can have a great hobby experience no matter what that number is. I truly believe that. You don't have to be buying high-end stuff, you know. The people that buy high-end stuff is because they can afford everybody would want high-end stuff most likely if they could afford it. It's about where you are in your financial journey.
I think that's so huge, right? And I mean, at the end of the day, my hobby budget is also variable because it depends on how much I sell that month, right? And how much extra funds are in my PayPal or my my business checking account from those sales that last month. But I think that's so huge. And again, it comes back to something we talked about earlier. You've got to enjoy that buying and selling aspect to approach the hobby the way that I approach it. And if you don't enjoy it, approaching it the way that you approach it is just as valid and just as great, right? Because you wouldn't enjoy it if you were having to spend the time buying and selling the way that I buy and sell. And that's a huge part. At the end of the day, we want to enjoy both the cards that we're getting and the process that we're using to acquire them, right? And that can vary so significantly. And it doesn't, like you said, it doesn't have to be high dollar. I focus primarily, my inventory is primarily focused on low to mid end stuff, right? I've got probably 100,000 25-cent to $1 cards at the shop that people go through. And I've got customers that go and they spend hours every weekend digging through those 25-cent to $1 boxes, filling up 800 count boxes full of stars and cards from their favorite teams that they enjoy. And there's kids that come in and even this last weekend that came in and bought, they're buying $4, $5, $6, $10 worth of base and insert cards of stars of their favorite players. And they're having a blast finding them and saying, Dad, look at this one. Or, hey, I've never seen this one before. And they're having tons of fun doing that type of stuff. Even at the 25-cent to a couple dollar a card, range of things. And so they're having just as much fun as the folks next door picking up the $500, $600, $1,000 PSA 10 of whoever it is that they're looking at the main LCS, across the hall there. So there's opportunities for everybody, both the types of cards that you enjoy at whatever price point you're finding enjoyment out of, using whatever process to find and acquire those cards that you're enjoying along the way. And I think that's one of the things that makes the hobby so great.
Totally. There's no exclusivity there. Everybody can be included in the hobby at those various levels. You mentioned, getting a kid that piles up $6, $10, $20 worth of cards and you get that $20. Do you immediately go, okay, this is going to turn into a 67 high number? Or do you think, what do I want to spend this $20 or whatever? Do you have like stuff you're going, okay, I need to build up this much money because I'm targeting this next card for my PC kind of thing?
Yeah, I approach it kind of like I like to have a certain amount of cash reserves ready to go, depending on what collection might walk into the shop or what I might find on Facebook Marketplace or whatever, that I need to be able to have cash ready to go for whatever walks through the door, right? So I like to have a certain amount of cash ready to go for that. I like to have a certain amount ready to go in the business checking account for some of those bigger collections that come in or that I get approached with. Recently had somebody from town here that was moving out of state and was going to be kind of downsizing when they moved and wasn't going to have near the space for what they had. And he approached me with it was 3 pickup trucks worth of cards that he approached me if was interested, if I wanted to snag from him. And I did. And I needed to have a decent amount of cash on hand or, in the bank account ready to go to be able to pick up those cards. And so I do have kind of targets for making sure that if I do get that big collection that comes my way once or twice a year, that I'm ready to go for that. But then it's kind of like once I've got those reserves on hand ready to go, then it's kind of where do I want to go next, right? Like I was kind of planning for the Seaver. I was planning for my Nolan Ryan rookie when I needed to pick that one up. My Dr. J rookie when I was working on that basketball set. Some of those bigger cards like that, I was kind of planning for where I wanted to go next, and kind of have a want list of some of the bigger cards that I want to be ready for, over the next several years. But like you were talking about, I think not too long ago, patience is key. I think you were just talking about even earlier today when I was listening, right? You're going to the National and you have your list of cards, but if you don't see it for the price that you want to pay it, you're going to be patient. And I'm kind of that same way. As I know what I want to be working towards, but I don't I'm in this for the next 50 years or whatever, right? Like I don't necessarily need to have that card or check those off right away. And so I do have, so that's a long answer for yes, I've got kind of a strategic plan for some of the things that I want to keep working towards. But I don't necessarily have that down to every sale, knowing that I'm going to set aside X% of every sale to go towards that piece, if that makes sense.
No, it totally makes sense. And I love how you think about that. Yeah, I'm, like you said, I mentioned there's some key vintage cards that I'm looking to hopefully pick up at the National. And yet if I don't, I don't, after 40 years, I've learned that it's a marathon, not a sprint. I've said that many times. It's fun to wait, which sounds weird. So it's okay to wait. Like it's like the mindset of, especially like my kids are in their 20s. So this generation of right now, like I got to have it right now. And I'm like, no, you really don't. Like, it's okay. And as a vintage guy, you really have to be patient, because sometimes the cards you kind of get priced out a little bit. And so that's been true for me. And I just wait, and lo and behold, prices are coming back where it's getting a little bit more reasonable. And for me, especially, again, I only have so much money that I'm taking to the National or anything, all the time. And it's like, I can't just buy everything now, even if I wanted to.
Sure.
Right. And I don't know that I would enjoy it if I had unlimited funds, won the lottery, so to speak, and could just spend so much money on cards. So it's so funny to hear you talk about this. And I think for some people out there, this might be, hey, that's the ticket I'm looking for, to be able to, because you can look at it as a stepping stone. Now I can afford things that I can't out of my discretionary. Like, it can be a hybrid, right? You can use some discretionary funds, and you can say, hey, maybe I could sell off some things that I don't care as much about, hopefully for a profit, and be able to turn that into, something else. People ask me all the time, Mike, why don't you sell some stuff and buy a Mantle 52 Tops or whatever? And the answer is, because I don't buy stuff that I don't want in my collection. Yeah. Like I don't just buy bulk, Ty does, for bench clear. And that's what we do with gold, or not, with Chasing Cardboard, for example. Like, we're going next week to look at a collection, by the way. You'll get a kick out of this, Mike. 6 million cards. 6 million. It's an entire house.
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh my gosh. Like, I'm going with him just probably to laugh the whole time. Like, are you kidding me? Like, that has zero appeal to me. Like, I just look at it and go, all that time, I'd rather be playing golf, or whatever. But I get, it's not that it won't be fun to look through them, but then I have to list them. And like, if I had to do all this, so that makes me, like you said, you got to enjoy all those aspects of it. To me, it feels like, that's a lot. Yep. And so, but if you had a hybrid approach, I think if you you don't have to sell necessarily full time, or you can do it as a side hustle, so to speak, and just do it with some extra time. Don't necessarily feel like, oh my gosh, I got to list this many items this week, or put yourself under any type of pressure, and just kind of sell some extra stuff to be able to upgrade your collection or get other things that you may not otherwise, with your discretionary budget, be able to afford. Right. So I think those can work really well together if the person has the right mindset.
Yeah. If you're disciplined, that's the perfect mindset. When I bought out the shop in 2020, there was about 1 million cards worth of inventory that I bought out, and about 600 to 700,000 of it was unsorted. It was essentially just piles of collections that he had bought over the years as he had been operating. And that's kind of how I approached it. Is I didn't put this pressure on myself I have to get through this in a month or whatever. It was, if I'm at the shop, I'll snag a couple boxes and start going through it. If I've got some extra time in the morning or in the evening as we're watching shows with the family or whatever on TV, I'll grab a box and I'll start flipping through it. But I didn't put that pressure on myself to have to get through it, have to get it all listed and turned around in a moment's notice or right away. Or, I kind of approached it with, this is so many cards that it's just going to take me a while to work my way through it. And I'll just approach it that way. And that took that pressure off. I was still generating enough, funds along the way to kind of replenish the bank account that I had used to purchase the big collection and that type of thing. And so I didn't have that financial pressure because I wasn't going into debt. It was all profits that I used to make that buyout. And so I didn't have that extra pressure on, I've got to sell this right away because I stole money from our savings account, or I went into debt to be able to buy this. It just created so much financial freedom to be able to just enjoy that process of looking, working my way through it, having fun going along the way. And it just adds so much more, for me.
Yeah. Do you think if you had the pressure either put on by your spouse, by your situation that you may have put yourself in, that would have sucked some of the joy out of it?
Oh, I think so a ton, right? I think if I was trying to operate and do this buying and selling, and I was doing it from a position where I was stretching myself financially, either from the use of day-to-day funds or going into debt or those types of things to be able to kind of cover the cost of what I was buying, I wouldn't enjoy that one bit. I don't think, and I go to even to the point of when I bought my 86 Fleer Jordan rookie, one of the cards I'd always wanted, right? If I would have had to spend money from savings or my paycheck to buy that, I would be second guessing my decision all the time, right? If I would have been using those same funds to buy the Seaver rookie or some of these other cards that are 4 figures or more, right? I'd be second guessing my purchase decisions of, man, I should have been putting that money into the kids' college fund, or I should have been, doing something else with it. I would be second guessing that all the time. And I wouldn't enjoy that card near the extent that I enjoy it, knowing that it was completely paid for with card profits. Right. And so that's just the way that my mind works, because I view my paycheck money as, I want to max out my IRA. I want to max out my 401k. We paid off our house. You completely paid off our house. All of these types, that's where I want to use my paycheck money for, preparing for the kids' college, all of those types of things. I don't want to have to second guess my hobby versus those things that impact long-term life decisions. Right. And so that's just the way that my brain works. And so I want to use that money for that stuff, and I can enjoy my hobby 100% knowing that my hobby is paying for itself.
So if someone's listening to this and they're saying to themselves, you know what, I might like to try to do this a little bit, maybe dip their toe in the pool, so to speak, try to use a dual model or whatever, a hybrid model like we're talking about, or just start building a self-sustaining hobby to where eventually you become fully self-sustaining. What are some tips and tricks that you would tell somebody, okay, I'm going to try this. What does Mike tell me I should do? That Mike, not this Mike.
There's a couple things that I would say, right? Is the first thing that I would say is it's okay to test the waters and start small. The first cards that I was buying were, like I said, cards from the quarter box, dollar box, that type of stuff. The first collection that I bought to resell was like a $90, $100 collection, right? That I was able to work my way through and turn into $200 to $300, right? So it's okay to start small, to experiment a little bit, see if you do enjoy it, right? See if you're passionate about it like I am, or if you hate the thought of sorting, listing, packing, and shipping, right? And to not jump in with a $5 or $6 or $1,000 or $3,000 collection and sink those types of funds when you don't know if you're going to even enjoy it at all. It's okay to start small and work your way up. That's one thing. And then the other thing that I would suggest people think about is how much time and effort are you willing to put into it? Because I can buy base and insert cards super cheap, a penny a card, half cent a card, and I'm okay with spending the time to sell them on Sport Lots, but you might not be, right? And so, but there's other alternatives. A site like COMC, where you can take, your $1 to $20, $30 cards. All you've got to do at that point is put them in penny sleeves, ship them to COMC. And as long as you're okay paying a little bit of a processing fee and a little more of a sales commission, your manual work that's needed is next to nothing. Right. And so there's alternatives like that where you can, if you're good at buying collections, you enjoy that purchase aspect of it, but don't want to do the listing and shipping work. You can do use a site like COMC you make your purchase and then send them all to COMC, and then they will do all of the scanning, listing, shipping, and all of that stuff for you for the commission that's associated with that. So there's multiple opportunities for that depending on what aspects you enjoy and how much time you're interested in putting into it. And so start small, test things out, see what you enjoy, what you don't enjoy. Experiment with a few of the different selling platforms, COMC, Sport Lots, eBay, etc., and see where things land for you to see if it's something that you want to continue to scale up and grow, or if it's something that you say, you know what, this just isn't for me. I'm going to figure out a budget for myself for the hobby and just focus on making purchases. And like we said before, we've been saying this whole time, either way is fine. No matter what is fine, depending on what you enjoy the most and what you're going to have the most fun going through and doing along the way.
Awesome. Well, Mike, as we finish up, I just want you to tell everybody, where I know you're on a lot of different platforms besides your podcast. Tell everybody how they can connect with you. Maybe somebody has some questions about this that they may want to ask you directly. How can they get a hold of you?
Yeah, sure. So everything's kind of centered on my kind of original content source at waxpackhero.com. I started with a blog. I've also got the podcast, the Wax Pack Hero Sports Card Minute, that is available kind of anywhere that podcasts are found. You can send me an email, waxpackhero@gmail.com. And you can also find me on TikTok at Wax Pack Hero, Instagram at Wax Pack Hero, and as the name here on the screen says, on Twitter is probably where I'm most active, at the Mike Summer on Twitter. I'd love to answer any questions you have, anything like that. I'm happy to help. Helping other people figure out ways to do this and learn and come back into the hobby. That's one of the reasons I started doing content. So I'm happy to answer any questions that people have. That's awesome. And for the Twitter, it's at Mike SOMMER, not summer like the season, but summer SOMMER. So check him out, and you guys will enjoy his podcast. He does a lot of different things, and it's great. So Mike, thanks for being on the show today, man. I really appreciate it, and a lot of insight. And no matter what realm of the hobby you're in, this is a model that might make some sense for you. So check it out. Think about it. Yeah, thanks for having me on. I really appreciate it. It's a great conversation. You bet. All right, guys, we'll see you next week for another episode. And for now, just, hey, no matter whether it's sustaining or whatever, enjoy the hobby and keep collecting.